A constitution that had specific timelines for certain legislative proposals to be passed by this very House, and the legislative's proposal to enable the implementation of not more than 2/3 gender rule is now 8 years, Mr. Speaker, and it has not been passed. All the others have been passed.
It's the one question that Kenya has struggled to answer.
Uamuzi wa Maraga vyenye ameamua, sisi kama Wakenya tufuate na Uhuru Kenyatta afuate sheria. Ile sheria ndio ilimweka kwa hiyo kiti na hiyo sheria ndio itamtoa.
Hii mbunge naonelea ni vizuri ifunjwe kwa sababu imekosa kutekeleza ile rule ya 2/3 gender. Ile ingine hii mbunge ukiangalia hata iwezi tekeleza, ni vile they are not united. Ukiangalia uko ndani wana vita mingi, kwa hivyo hawezi ongea lugha moja.
Mimi nataka kumwambia rais asifuje bunge, kwa maana tutaenda hasara kubwa sana. Tumetoka kwenye janga hii ya COVID-19. Uchaguzi tena ni pesa tunatakikana, na tuone mahali serikali inaenda kombo.
Mimi ningeomba rais afuje bunge kwa sababu tupate ajenda ya wamama. Juu sasa kama vile Maraga aliandikia rais message ama barua, ni kuonekana hiyo mkakati ya wamama ya ajenda haijafika. Kwa hiyo mimi ningependa rais afuje bunge juu tupate wamama wengi kwa bunge, juu maneno ya wamama hiyo inaendelea kwa bunge na inapitishwa katika hii Kenya.
A constitutional requirement that not more than 2/3 of electoral offices be held by one gender has proven to be the proverbial Pandora's box. And this unsuccessful 10-year quest to meet the gender rule culminated in this 10-page letter in which the Chief Justice advised the President to dissolve Parliament for being unconstitutional. The BBI now proposes some radical constitutional changes that will force political parties and voters to get the required number of women into the counties, the Senate, and the National Assembly. But at what cost? A leading element in the 9-point agenda is inclusivity. In fact, the section on inclusivity ends with a commitment by Honorable Raila Odinga and His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta saying that they will work together to guarantee that all Kenyans are served equally by public institutions, no matter who leads them.
In terms of whether or not that was addressed, I don't know. I wonder if for example, in relation to gender, I wonder if the Chief Justice's order had not come out in the period between when the first BBI report came out and the final report came out, if there would have been any attempts to address
The gender issue.
The issue of the 2/3 principle in relation to electoral office at all.
You think that was the catalyst?
I suspect that the coincidence of him having made that statement and that close to the release of the report led possibly to some rethinking around aspects of dealing with that issue.
Bobby, what does the BBI amendment bill propose in terms of tackling inclusion and diversity?
Apart from perhaps the issue of gender, and especially ensuring the gender quotas are met in the National Assembly particularly, and now, like you see in Senate, the 47 times 2 man-woman formulation. I think the others are really already there. It's a matter of practice and behavior.
Implementing.
Yeah.
Can we talk about the proposals on gender specifically? So how do they compare to what the Constitution of 2010 prescribes?
In fact, I wanted Atango. That's why I was introducing it.
Atango.
So first of all, the original formula that we had for ensuring the 2/3 gender principle was met was messed up by the parliamentarians. It's the Parliamentary Select Committee meeting in Naivasha that threw out the provisions that we had that would have ensured that it was met. I see in BBI an attempt to deal with it, but I don't know how it's going to work. It seems very confusing. It seems quite muddied, and it risks extreme bloating. So let me try and tackle them slowly. In respect of the Senate, it's okay. From a gender perspective, that bit is sorted out.
So now, instead of having one senator per county,
yeah, we have two. I don't know that it was necessary to go that way in order to deal with it, but you cannot fault it in terms of addressing the issue of gender parity. We are guaranteed 50-50 representation in the Senate.
Would it have any implication as to how Senate is run?
I don't think so. My concern with the Senate has more to do with the exclusion and removal of other groups that have faced exclusion historically. So if you look at the recommendations with respect to the Senate, there are no longer seats for persons with disabilities in the Senate. There are no longer seats for the youth in the Senate. And this has happened before. Bobby, you recollect.
Yeah. Currently, the Senate consists of 47 elected senators, 16 nominated women senators, 2 senators, a man and a woman, representing the youth, 2 other senators, a man and a woman, representing persons living with disabilities, and the Speaker. But the amendment bill proposes to amend Article 98 of the Constitution to remove the nominated women senators, as well as the 2 youth senators and the other 2 representing persons living with disabilities. And instead, it proposes to have 2 senators elected from each county, a man and a woman. Does BBI prescribe or propose how we're going to make sure that there are young people and persons with disability in the Senate?
No, it has taken out the seats.
Right.
It has removed the seats, and there's no provision. And it's important because counties are so big, it's more expensive to run for the office of senator or governor. And we know, therefore, that is the house where youth and persons with disabilities are likely to face problems, getting in. It's the reason why even women historically have had problems. So whereas we've catered to women and we've catered to the issue of gender inclusion, young women and women with disabilities have not been provided for. And, young men and men with disabilities have not been provided for in the Senate. And there is no reason why they couldn't have kept those 4 seats. I think, given that they were already doubling the number of seats, all it would have taken is to just leave those 4 seats in there. I don't understand why they were removed. Now, in respect to the national...
I have another question about the Senate. So if you have 2 senators per county, I'm assuming that it's possible to elect people from 2 different parties. So the man could be from one party, yes, and the woman could be from another party. Would there be an ideological clash in the Senate?
I think it doesn't matter.
Right.
Yeah, because the Senate is not executing. They're legislators. And so it is, I think for me, it is neither here nor there.
Okay.
Yeah, there is no need for, it's an expression of the people and of their diversity. Yeah.
So we go to the National Assembly.
Now, the National Assembly.
The BBI promoters proposed some interesting constitutional amendments to try and deal with the gender role quagmire. For starters, BBI abolishes the woman representative seat. Alongside that, it also abolishes the special seats for persons with disabilities. And then, where the Constitution caps the number of constituencies to 290, BBI proposes adding another 70 to make them 360. The bill further proposes sanctions for political parties that fail to comply with the gender principle. This would mean that, at the nomination stage, political parties would be forced to have at least a third of their nominees being from the minority gender. So how exactly will this impact the gender role?
let me distinguish between what I think they were trying to do and what my concerns are. So I think they were trying to use a mixed member proportional representation system. They were trying to reintroduce that in the sense that basically we have party lists now, whereby if not enough women are elected, not enough women get through the first past the post, women will be drawn from these lists until they meet the threshold. What I don't understand is why we now have to have 70 additional seats. Those two things are not tied to each other. You know, then secondly, and it's a reason of concern because you're starting off with the National Assembly now with already 360 members. And then imagine a scenario where no woman is elected as one of those 360. So how many women are you going to add from the lists in order to hit the proper number? As radical as it sounds, I don't understand why we didn't have the number of seats in the National Assembly, which already was too many.
So the 290 was already too many?
290 was already too many. Originally, when you look at the proposals that had been made by the COE and by the Guy Commission before us, it was meant to be about 80 additional seats, which were meant to be strictly only for the people who historically have not been in parliament. Women, persons with disabilities, ethno-racial minorities, those kind of groups were the ones whose names were to be drawn from. And so this system, and parliamentarians have consistently, they did it to us in Naivasha, whereby they added 80 seats of what we already have. I don't know why. And it seems, with all due respect, they're trying to preserve particular individuals' seats. Because when you look at the, I think it's the second schedule in the bill, there are seats which, because in 2010, they told us that they had come up with something called the population quota, which was to be non-negotiable. That population quota basically is supposed to be derived by dividing the number of Kenyans by the number of constituencies. So why do we need 70 more seats of that nature?
Including 12 in Nairobi.
Yes, I'm lost. I don't. And so what you see is a little proviso in the second schedule that says that certain seats are to stay in place for greater certainty. Any protected constituency in the counties of Tana River, Lamu, Taita, Taveta, Marsabit, Isiolo, Nyandarua, Nyeri, Samburu, Elgeyo Marakwet, Baringo, Vihiga, and Busia shall not have their protected status impaired by the delimitation of additional constituencies. Now, if you were to look at the current constitution, there were some seats that fell below the population quota at the time we went to the elections in 2013. Those seats were to be preserved only for the first election. Post that, the IEBC was supposed to review and remove them. So I am lost as to how they decided, because this is an issue of inclusivity and equality. Why did they decide that Mombasa, for instance, needs 3 more seats and maybe Bungoma doesn't need any more constituencies? How did they arrive at that conclusion?
And they don't explain. They don't
yes,
explain.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's the exact same thing they did to us in 2010. And it literally turned out, with all due respect to Kenyan parliamentarians, that there were members, literally, of the PSC whose seats would have been lost if the population quota was applied. And I'm sorry to say, one has the feeling that, again, amongst the promoters of the BBI are people whose seats may disappear if this formula is not applied. So we are literally making, people are literally writing into the constitution positions for themselves. So my question is this: the Kenyan people are somewhat, I think, according to the latest census, about 50 million. So if in another 10 years, the Kenyan people grow to some 70 million, are we going to add another 80 seats to the National Assembly? Are we going to keep adding seats? And then remember, if we're not respecting the inclusion principle as voters, in order to, if our political culture hasn't changed, in order to meet the gender threshold, we will then have to increase even more. So the best way to deal with this question, in most countries, without bloating the parliament, has historically been to actually adapt a proportional representation system.
Which means?
Which means that when you vote for a party. And then this is what happens in South Africa. And then that party has already given lists before the people run for the elections. So you know that if the ANC wins in Gauteng, these are the men, women, or youth they propose to have become the MP. And that's how South Africa has been able to then look and achieve the 1/3 principle. So yeah, essentially what we would be saying is that Atsango, because I think the Purple Party has good policies, I'm voting for the Purple Party. The Purple Party will have presented a list of who it is they would nominate for constituency Mariakani. Yeah? So I know that in voting for the Purple Party, my MP, if the Purple Party wins for Mariakani, will be Miss So-and-so, or my MP will be Mr. So-and-so. It allows the political party to then, this is the system in Scandinavia, it's the system in South Africa, I think it is the system in Mozambique. It is a part of the system in Rwanda. Rwanda has an MMPR, mixed member proportional representation. So that's one of the ways you achieve it. The other way you achieve it is to have special seats and constituencies reserved specifically for certain groups of people, which is the Uganda method, which is what we had done. So the alternative would have been to keep the 47 seats
For the
women
reps.
and then provide for party lists, which is what we had done in the revised harmonized draft. Party lists in case even between the 47 seats and the first past the post positions, you still had a shortfall, you could then top up from the party lists. So this...
But the current proposal is to actually abolish the woman rep
completely.
seat completely.
Yeah.
And instead...
you will have these lists, which once the election has taken place, if you don't have enough women, you then keep drawing from the lists, which, because historically, before we had the women reps, we would only achieve about 9%, 9 to 10% women. Best case scenario is that you will have 10% of your 360 seats if we go on historical precedent. So only 36 women get in. So you have to keep adding. And remember, every time you add, it means that the portion of the 1/3 goes up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have to keep growing.
Yes.
So that means the biggest implication is actually a very bloated parliament.
Massive National Assembly. Massive.
Yeah.
And there's no cap to...
No, you don't in this system. You don't usually put in a cap.
Right.
So the mistake they made was deciding to increase the number of the first past the post seats from 290. They should never have increased them from 210 to 290 in the first place. And now they've gone from 290 to 360 without doing anything. And I think they've addressed it by saying that 1/3 of the candidates for political parties must be women.
Right.
But again, there's a problem. You have no way of insisting that political party X runs women in their strongest, in their strongholds.
And then how do you ensure that there's no tokenism within the parties?
You can't. And for me, that one I don't even try to deal with because it's human nature. Right. Yeah. My worry is more to do with that we will end up, particularly because now there are these lists, there's the likelihood that women will now be told, oh, well, you know, you've got the place. And then, so women will be discouraged from running and will be stigmatized for the fact that there is some provision for affirmative measures. And then you will, you know, and so you will still not meet the proviso.
Like we've seen with a lot of the provisions, the sort of niceties to ensure that different constituencies feel incorporated and included, which might not be a bad thing. I mean, sometimes you have, they call it the law of unintended consequences. So you might find our lady folks gaining from this out of a different agenda, but it is a gain. But my problem with that will be that the implementation of it, like you're asking, so who will go into the party list?
Into the list.
And earlier, in our earlier show, I talked about the improving a political and constitutional philosophy. So what we have so far, and I think that's why when you talk to Kenyans, when you go out and talk to Kenyans about even women reps, you find many Kenyans are disillusioned. And it's both ways, men and women. And when you ask them what the reason is, especially when you talk about affirmative action facilities for ensuring that women gain more space in the political field, they'll point towards, look at so-and-so as what have the women reps done, et cetera, et cetera. How have they performed at the counties? Look at the nominated MCAs and the women and all sort of, some it's conjecture, some are actually valid reasons. And so to me, I thought we'd also go ahead and we don't do this for men. You see, we just have the broad strokes around how a man is expected to behave in Parliament and carry himself as a public official. But I thought that perhaps there could have been some guidance, even around the political parties, as to who, if we're going to have party lists, and especially in ensuring that the women who appear in the party lists are representative of the sector of society, but above all, will probably undertake the duty of what those seats entail, so that we don't go back to the abuse of these facilities.
But I think maybe the women will argue that, you know, the men are not subjected to that type of scrutiny
That's what
at
I'm
the party
saying.
level.
There isn't such scrutiny. But perhaps maybe it should be for both, so that we could qualify. I don't know how much further we can qualify whom we get as an MP or a state officer. But I think those are some of the reasons or the issues that we could also have reflected upon. The other issue that, the blotting, which also comes, the blotting is a problem in the sense that I'm sure you've heard it from MPs who are serving in the current House. Mm-hmm. And how many are they now? 400 plus? Mm-hmm. And they complain that huge number actually,
it's even difficult to keep tabs of what the House is doing.
And also debate, good debate in the House around issues.
So how would you remedy it? Would you reduce the number of constituencies and
I would have capped our constituencies for first past the post at 145.
At 145?
Yes. And then at best, I would have sent it back to the original 210. Yeah. And then I would have designated to a body specifically charged, and this is meant to be the work of the IABC, to a body charged with the electoral management body to advise and to delimit the actual specific constituencies and to ensure, because that's their constitutional responsibility, to ensure that they met the population quota. I don't see how people who have a direct interest in the design of constituencies should be the ones determining those constituencies. And this is the original reason why I said that BBI was very much about the political class as a class, creating new conditions for themselves. And this is very much, for me, about the exigencies of the present. They're not looking at Kenya's population is going to keep growing. We cannot keep adding seats just because the country's population is growing.
Right.
I am concerned about a different diversity dimension that has disappeared with the removal of the 47 women county reps, because the reason why MMPR was resisted in Bomas was because there was a fear of ethnic domination under MMPR. So we have a situation here where now, picture a situation where most of the women on the party list just coincidentally happen to come from the same ethnic group.
Right.
How you know that this is a lot of what is given as arguments for not having this in place is that Kenya is the only member state of the East African community that does not satisfy the 1/3 principle. Only Kenya. Yeah. So what is so special about Kenya's particular African culture that does not allow women into electoral office? Why has Uganda been able to meet it? Why has Tanzania been able to meet it?
Rwanda.
Why has Rwanda and Burundi?
And is that a question to be solved constitutionally?
For me, yes, in terms of the way of putting in place mechanisms, but the will to do that is a political question.
Yeah.
It's just simply that Kenyan patriarchs have refused.
In the Constitution of Kenya 2010, what interventions did you make in addressing this question of inclusivity?
I mean, there are there's tons of references to inclusivity. One of the reasons why we needed a new constitution was the majority of the Kenyan people actually felt marginalized. And felt that the state really did not address them or their needs. Large swathes, whether you look at people who were excluded on the basis of their gender, people who were excluded on the basis of their ethnic identity, or people who were excluded on the basis of disability, of their age for the youth, because young people are the majority of Kenyans. There was no provisions that prohibited discrimination on the basis of age in the old constitution. Our whole legal infrastructure did not address large swathes of our population. I think one of the problems we have is that inclusivity has been defined in a very narrow way as a society, and I think this continues to be an issue. The Constitution, despite the Constitution addressing the issue of inclusivity in a very broad way, and inclusiveness is one of the national principles. I think our psyche continues to be our national psyche continues to define and understand inclusivity just on the basis of ethnic inclusion. And even with respect to that, there isn't a problem in the law. But in practice, we are still failing woefully. And so part of the challenge, I think, for me with respect to BBI and this whole process has been that we are trying to address what is actually a political problem through legal means. I don't think Kenya's problem, before 2010, there was a problem with the law. Post 2010, our problem is not a legal problem. Our problem is our political culture, which is a culture of exclusion, which is a culture that privileges those who are wealthy over those who are poor, and then people who tend to be on the outside looking in tend to have certain characteristics about them. They will tend to have belonged to ethnic communities, ethno-racial communities that are historically either minorities, or even if they're not minorities, have not had access to the center. They will tend to, to be female. They will tend to be on the younger side or extremely old.